Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. From 1 King West in downtown Toronto, welcome to the Empire Club of Canada. For those of you just joining us through either our webcast or our podcast, welcome to the meeting. Before our distinguished speakers are introduced today, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our head table guests. I would ask each guest to stand for a brief moment and be seated as your name is called, and I'd ask the audience to refrain from applauding until all of the head table guests have been introduced. So, of course, we must begin with our guest of honor, Ms. LaFlamme, Chief News Anchor and Senior Editor, CTV News, National News. I can do this. I've explained that I came back very, very late last night and I'm very jet-lagged, so forgive me for my stumbling. Sarah Banks, VP Group Director, FCB Toronto. Ali Badruddin, Managing Director, Management Consulting Strategic Corporation Inc., Director, Empire Club of Canada. Mr. Michael Cook, Editor, Torstar Corporation. Mr. Mike Van Solen, Managing Principal, Navigator Limited. Ms. Rosa Wang, Senior Broadcast Producer, News and Network Specials, CTV National News. Mr. John Hondrick, Chair, Torstar Corporation. Mr. Gordon McIver, Past President, Empire Club of Canada, and of course our other guest of honor, Ms. Sally Armstrong, human rights activist, journalist, and award-winning author. And my name is Barbara Jessen. I am the President of the Empire Club of Canada and the President of Jessen & Company Communications. So we're very pleased to welcome some students from Centennial College and Ryerson University. Thank you to Bell and Nona MacDonald-Heaslip for sponsoring our student table today. Students, please rise and be recognized. This is going to be one fascinating lunch. Of course, what interests me most in this whole debate about fake news and alt-facts is the way both sides of the divide shout at one another, and we don't seem to be getting any closer to common ground. Not that alternative facts haven't always been a part of the political landscape, but today, emboldened by a US president who regularly derides mainstream journalists as creators of false news, the purveyors of misleading information are on overdrive. Most of us are quite simply astonished and dumbfounded, one might say gobsmacked, by the bold-faced lies being propagated as fact. But I was watching a roundup the other night of Donald Trump's first year in office, and despite all logic, his base remains solidly behind him and deeply distrustful of traditional media. Several years ago, I read a book by a writer named Jonathan Haidt entitled The Righteous Mind. Haidt asks the perennial question, why doesn't the other side listen to reason? His research shows that particularly when facing moral or political questions, people reach their conclusions quickly and then scan their brains to marshal arguments that defend their position, producing reasons only later to justify what they've already decided. Haidt posits that reasoning itself is not impartial. It doesn't act like a judge or a teacher weighing in and evaluating evidence. It acts more like a lawyer or a press secretary, justifying our facts and judgments to others. In this interpretation, reason evolved to help us spin, not to help us learn. If you want to change people's minds, Haidt argues that there is no point in appealing to reason. Let's substitute here hard facts. He suggests that we have to address the underlying institutions or emotions that lead to the conclusions that reason defends. With us are two of the most credible journalists working in the Canadian media landscape. We are very fortunate to have them with us to share their perspectives on this bewildering new world we live in. Lisa LaFlamme has been the chief news anchor and senior editor of CTV National News since 2011, leading the country's #1 newscast. She led CTV News, delivered live coverage of the inauguration of Donald Trump from Washington, D.C. She is known for landing exclusive interviews with leading global figures and has interviewed 5 Canadian prime ministers. Prior to assuming the anchor chair, Ms. LaFlamme spent a decade on the road as national affairs correspondent for CTV National News, covering everything from wars and elections to natural disasters in some of the world's most dangerous locations. She is a trailblazer for women in Canadian news broadcasting, covering some of the biggest stories of the times. Sally Armstrong is a human rights activist, a journalist, and an award-winning author. She has covered stories about women and girls in zones of conflict all over the world. From Bosnia and Somalia to the Middle East and Rwanda, Congo, and Afghanistan, and Iraq, her eyewitness reports have earned her awards, including the Gold Award from the National Magazine Awards Foundation and the Authors Award from the Foundation for the Advancement of Canadian Letters. She received the Amnesty International Canada Media Award in 2000, 2002, and 2011, and again last year. She's the author of several acclaimed books, including Veiled Threat, The Hidden Power of the Women of Afghanistan, The 9 Lives of Charlotte Taylor, Bitter Roots, Tender Shoots, The Uncertain Fate of Afghanistan's Women, and The Ascent of Women. Please join me in welcoming these two remarkable journalists to our podium.
Hi, everybody.
Well, no shortage of news today.
Yeah, I guess I should say at the outset I've had about 2 hours of sleep, so forgive me.
I had plenty. I heard the news and went to bed. But my first question, of course, would be, given the shocking story that CTV broke last night, and given everybody's concern and quick accusation these days of fake news, could you take us through the anatomy of a breaking news story and how you make sure it is not fake news?
Well, I think what unfolded and what ultimately went to air last night on CTV National News is an absolute, affront to what fake news is, in the sense that it was a collaborative effort. It's months in the process to break a story like that. And the last few weeks, it is intense interviewing of not just the victims, but anybody connected to them. The amount of work that the reporters and producers put in to verify every single thing you hear, from locations to you name it. It is a stunning thing. And then the last week, hours on the phone with the lawyers, and because of course we listen to, this very small team listens to every single interview that has been conducted. So I don't laugh, believe me, but this morning I listened to many people saying, well, they're anonymous victims. And I think people don't realize they're not anonymous to us. And they're not anonymous in this particular case to Patrick Brown. It is our journalistic obligation to tell the person that you are about to report on what the allegation is, to give them plenty of time, 6 hours in this case, to respond to the allegation. So it is fascinating how many weeks and weeks and weeks of really quiet work goes into something like this. Then it gets really intense when you feel like you've got it. And then yesterday we had the final corroboration that we needed to know this is just so solid. And when our lawyer said, okay, this is now a journalistic question when you push the go button, so to speak. And then it's intense and it's crazy. And to be in a newsroom on the night of a huge story like that it's just otherworldly, because in the early part of the afternoon, only a few people really know. We've got, a fake intro, fake news. We put a fake intro in the lineup so that nobody else knows, because we don't want anybody to have the information until it's perfect in the system. Because lots of people can access your news computer from across the network. Anyway, and then slowly it started emerging, okay, we've got something really significant here. And then we hear there's a press conference at 9:45. And when I first saw that email, I thought, oh, 9:45 in the morning. And I was thinking, okay, well, I can do that and still get to this event, and thinking of everything else. And then I read it again, it's 9:45 tonight. Wow, okay, what's he gonna do? And then we watch the press conference. we're live at 10 o'clock. Literally, the show is going to air, and someone yells out, "They're resigning." And you know, by the time, at 10 o'clock, 4 of the people around Patrick Brown had resigned. By 11 o'clock news, we were up to 5. By 1 in the morning, it was up to 7. By 1:40 in the morning, he had resigned, and it's just a flurry of craziness at that final moment. And you don't know. I think we're all a little nervous when you're about to put something to air. But the one thing that gives me confidence is the hard work that everybody has put in. The hours and hours, like the public doesn't realize how much work goes into these stories so that we are absolutely rock solid. And that is what makes us not fake news. That is the difference right there.
So a lot of what we're looking at today has to do with public awareness, public education, informing ourselves so that we have better decisions and opinions to share. Fake news seems to be a pretty easy thing. You simply stand up and say, "No, I didn't do it," or "No, I wasn't there." And what we're seeing so often today is an outright lie. We're getting so used to it that we tend to move on to the next item. So define for me, what is fake news?
Well, I mean, fake news is exactly that, the deliberate effort to mislead people. It is misinformation that is designed to discredit a company, a person, to smear a reputation with a snippet of information that is a rumor, largely. And, you know, it's funny because inevitably we have to, even Barbara mentioned Donald Trump. We have to, because this is the man who, you know, as much as he likes to say he coined this, he didn't, but he did use the term fake last year in 2017 400 times. That is unbelievable to me, that he is the man who has really put this worm in the brain of everybody, and there are those who just see this as a permission almost. The term fake news is permission to ignore a story. Permission to say, "I don't like what you've got to say, so I'm going to label it fake news." It's very dangerous.
I mean, he uses language, well, I was going to say to his own liking, but he uses language, I don't even think a grade 4 student would use words like bigly, which I heard him say the other day. I'm going to change things bigly. I used to be a teacher. But you know,
but he's huge, though. Come on, you got to admit he's huge.
What I'm interested in talking to Lisa about is how this is affecting all of us. It knocks us off kilter, right? We don't believe anybody anymore. We don't believe our institutions, and with plenty of evidence in the news to say our institutions might be taking a piece of us. We don't believe people anymore. And from what I understand, this is a very damaging thing for democracy. And I'd like to ask you, how do you think about that as a news anchor, a person in a position of holding the trust of the public?
At the outset, I want to say that just a few weeks ago, I looked at a poll in this country. You know, we're all very quick to just assume the information from the US and think that it is our same story, and it so clearly isn't, specifically on this. And I'm proud to say, as a member of Canadian journalism, that the last poll, which was a sizable poll, 85% of Canadians still believe in credible news sources, in mainstream media, if you want, legacy media, call it what you want. The United States is shocking. It is 37% believe in the conventional news outlets that have forever been the purveyors of information on any level. But to your point, it's true that this destabilizes democracy to have this accusation. It's not just that we don't believe in, you know, what the media says. We don't believe our banks. We don't believe schools. We've lost trust in the things that make us a robust democracy, which is why I don't think we should take this as a joke or laugh off fake news. It is a very real trend now that is damaging to that which we hold dear, which is democracy. And as a journalist, it saddens me so much because I see firsthand every day, day in and day out, what the work of journalists around the world and around this country do every day to make sure that what they are putting in a newspaper or on television newscasts is the truth. And it's a very disturbing thing, but I also look at, globally, dictators are just like doing the happy dance, that now we can use the term fake news because Donald Trump used it. And when I hear officials from Myanmar saying that 600,000 Rohingya who were ethnically cleansed out of Rakhine State in Myanmar now living in these squalid camps in Bangladesh, oh, that's fake news. So we have journalists who, as you do, and as you know so well, risk their lives to go and show you exactly what's happening on the ground. And that is why it is so critically important, and it saddens me also. I mean, I don't want to get into this, but the shrinking of the media profile, because now more than ever, this needs to grow so that we can counter these uninformed accusations of fake news.
But we have to wonder how long fake news has been around. How long have people swayed the truth or added a fact that didn't? When you're covering conflict, we know that one of the first casualties of war is usually the truth. And it's not necessarily that somebody wants to lie to you. In my experience, they're so afraid you won't believe how bad things are. They up the ante a little, but you've got to be very careful. There's a quote from Isaac Asimov, the US scientist and writer, and he said this long before Trump. He said, "The strain of anti-intellectualism has been a constant thread winding its way through our political and cultural life, nurtured by the false notion that democracy means my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge." Is that what we're dealing with today?
So what?
I'm thinking of the red states.
He's got to be dead 20 years or something. And he said that. He's probably rolling over in his grave right now at how true that statement is today, that even the most uninformed opinion has to be viewed through the same prism as an informed opinion. It is absurd that anything less would be undemocratic, and yet it's true. And I think Twitter has become a platform for that. A lot of social media outlets that you've got. This is what I have to say, and people confuse opinion with fact. And I think that's such a true statement for what. Do you know what year he said that?
No.
It's got to be the 80s. I mean, but this is to a degree where we've come. I mean, algorithms are dictating what people read and what they watch. You're letting your Facebook feed. I'm going to say I'm probably the only person in this room who's actually not on Facebook intentionally, but it is true that we've sort of handed over our critical thinking gene to these algorithms who said, oh, well, you really liked those sort of alt-right sites, so that's all we're going to feed you. And it's kind of why we are so polarized right now. Everyone's in their bunker, their bias bunker, and it's so negative, and it's really unproductive in trying to build any kind of unity or fairness in society right now.
I think one of the issues now that we're facing fake news is that we see stories from two different points of view, and we don't know whether to trust either of them. And I have an example Lisa and I were both involved with. A week ago Sunday night, the fantastic television program 60 Minutes did a story on the American military in Afghanistan. That was Sunday night. On Monday night, I was on CTV with Lisa to discuss. I had just returned from Afghanistan, where I had done a story on the people of Afghanistan. The 60 Minute story was absolutely accurate. It was about the fact that American military cannot put their feet on the pavement of the city of Kabul. If they need to go 2 miles away, their words, I put that in kilometers for us, they go by helicopter 2 miles they go by helicopter because they are not safe to be on the streets of Kabul. And the whole program was about that lack of safety for the American military, armed to the teeth. My story, they made no mention whatsoever of the people of Afghanistan. My story was about the people of Afghanistan. I did mention the fact that the Taliban are boasting that they've taken over 50% of the country. There are 5 insurgencies. The security is a catastrophe. But I talked about the fact that the people of Afghanistan are actually, the security to one side, are better off than they've ever been in their lives. 9.2 million kids back in school. Maternal mortality decreased by 75%. Life expectancy from 47 years to 62 years. And polio almost eradicated. So this is pretty amazing news. That's what my story was about. Their story was about a soldier cannot walk on the streets of the main city in Kabul. So what is this? Propaganda on their part? Propaganda on my part? How do we, as viewers or readers, determine how to take news like that? Their story would say, that is the worst place on the planet. Mine would say, look at this, they're moving ahead.
Through the lens of military, I think it is. It feels that way because the fact that they need an Apache to get them from A to B down streets that we both walked down when you could. Both are news, and both reporters, any correspondent who's covering military is trying to get to the truth of whether the military is having an impact or not. You, or any journalist covering the humanitarian side, is trying to see what's happening in the city market. Is it still safe? They both actually have to work together. The military is there so that the public can be in the public market, as they would like to see the progress that you described in your piece. Both are news, and both, as I say, the goal is for both sets of reporters to find the truth. And I have to come back to the concept of fake news because I personally have very close friends who've done these stories and are suffering deeply mentally the trauma of what they covered. And to me, anybody who suggests that the work they're doing or the work you just did there, anybody who says that is fake news, that is a crime in itself. To me, it is so upsetting that that this stuff can just be dismissed and discredited. Now, the president of Afghanistan is quite, as you talk to him as well, open about the what's working and what's not working in that particular country. But both of those stories have to emerge, and I think we have to trust, again, it's about the credible journalist, that when they go cover the military, they're looking at the up and the downside. They're not spewing the military brass line, and you're not just carrying the shiny bauble, that shows kids are at school. You also show that to get to that school, they're risking their lives. Acid attacks, random IEDs that blow out a school, and then what happens to the progress? We focus, sadly, on that explosion. And that's why I loved what you just recently did, to shine a light on the positive stuff that we don't share as often as we should, and I admit that.
Tell me, sitting in your chair every night, what's the biggest change you've seen regarding this kind of reporting, let's say in the last 2 years?
Well, we always cared about facts and truth and getting it right. And, we don't always, and I think that's an important point, is when a media outlet, legitimate media outlet, gets it wrong, we correct it. You admit it and you correct it. What worries me is, it worries me as a journalist and as a human being, really, is this destabilizing of all things that were credible and the hard work people do. Can one simple social media, what do you call it, when Twitter blows up? I can't even think of the term now, but and its character assassination happens so fast. It's breakneck speed how something can happen, and boom, we forget. Tomorrow, we may not even remember that last night something happened that changed the face of the largest province in this country and the political campaign that's unfolding. So that concerns me greatly, is the short attention span of the public. And I'm saddened when I see open racism. I've never seen it like this before. And I will say it didn't start with Donald Trump. I saw it building. I saw it building in our own election campaign, that my Twitter feed was just full of hate and open racism. And these are people who confuse free speech with hate speech. And who's there with the checks and balances? Legitimate media outlets, people who, this is our job that we're trained to do. And I'm reminding people that, this isn't just someone comes off the street and starts spreading a rumor and say this is a news story. That worries me enormously, it does. And honestly, Rosa is here, who's my absolute right arm every day, all day, and every weekend, and always, and whether we're traveling on the road or here in Toronto, and it's always, always the same question. Do we have this right? We need to do 3 more phone calls. We've got to make sure we have this right. Every word in that newscast, we analyze. I'm not kidding you. Every single word, go through it. Is this really conveying what we mean to say here? And it's very serious when anybody tries to dismiss this kind of credibility for any journalist so off the cuff like that, and that concerns me.
Let's look at it from the side of the public. Just briefly, last question. What is the responsibility of the public? What have you done about your comment section, for example?
Wow, that's a great question. So, we closed our comment section, as did other media outlets, because it became a forum for hate. And even, I'll say to you, so you were on the show last
Don't you tell anybody that someone said something bad about me.
Not you, Sally. But I will be honest, because it's important people know what's out there. So Sally and I do a great segment on the positives unfolding, and what do I get? A litany of tweets, which I don't respond to, but I'm human. I do read it. And it's all about, okay, whatever, I'm glad things are going well, keep them there. It's all anti-immigration stuff. It's just like shocking how people, who some of them put their name to it, have no problem revealing this dark, ugly side of society and humanity that has always been there, and now it's like free license to say it out loud. Yeah. So we closed our comment section because it was not productive. Facebook, our CTV National News Facebook, you can still comment because it is your name, and we can find out what you had for breakfast 3 days ago on that one. Twitter is a different ballgame. So yeah, we have taken action, as have others, to try to cut down on adding fuel or being a platform for something we do not support to give air to.
I think we are about to face a big pushback from audiences all over North America, and I hope all over the world, because someone's going to have to deal with the fake news, with the really disgusting things that are being passed around on social media. In fact, the Canadian Journalism Foundation has just announced a $10,000 prize to the organization that, I'm going to try to quote them properly, it's a News Literacy Award to encourage practices that underpin factual reporting as key to democracy. But it always comes back to the public. And what are the people going to do about this? So now, what are you going to ask us? We have a time for a few questions, don't we? Please, go ahead. There's one right there.
Did Suzanne Boyce put you up to this question?
Not at all. Thank you for those comments. Sorry about that. Thank you for those comments, really insightful and interesting. I'm wondering if you could share some insights around perhaps the balance or tension between journalistic integrity and the sensationalism that we're seeing more and more of, I think, that drive audiences or sell papers, and that balance and or tension, however you see it.
Well, I mean, we call it clickbait and a catchy headline. has always been forever, as long as there has been newspapers or tabloids or whatever, TV news, it's that one-liner. We have this joke in the newsroom, something in your fridge will kill you. Stay with us, coming up after the break. And then, you know, it's like mold or something like that. But so we do have to think about that, but I hope that the viewer and the reader is as discerning. And this is, I think, what when you talk about media literacy, the new illiteracy is people who know how to read don't. And it doesn't preclude you from being the president of the United States. It's a fascinating thing. So again, it's about tearing down the sensationalism, which is also another definition of fake news, and telling telling it like it is. But you know, there's wars over what story is going to get the most clicks on it, and therefore the dimes that some advertiser is going to make because enough people clicked on it. It's the balance. It's the constant balance of
You know, the
finding it.
sensationalist side of it is so easily available, especially where I work. Yeah, I mean, stories like that you can pick up 6 a day. But to get to the real story behind all of that, that's the story that stays with the reader or viewer, and that's a story that makes change and contributes, I believe, I hope, to democracy. But to pick up the sensation, well, people do, and we can pick them up on feeds all over the place.
You know, a good point to that is during the US election, this story, the Pope endorses Donald Trump. Now that was clearly BS, but it trended on Twitter, it became fact. For a lot of people believed that was fact. And I think that part of media literacy is that the public needs to click on the site, do a little bit more homework, find out who owns that site. What is the point of that site? Who's trying to convince you of something and why? And there are such simple ways, and it's always check the source, consider the source.
You know, one of the ways I have to say is that when the Toronto Star started, I'm just losing his name, the reporter who kept track of Donald Trump's lies.
Dale.
It was a brilliant idea. It became the news itself, and everybody started talking about what a great idea it was, repeating the lies, etc. But it's a check and balance that we didn't have to use before. I thought that was very smart, Mr. Cook.
Whoever thought the word lie? Like, we never, ever accused people of lying on TV. We just never did it.
You wouldn't dare do it.
We never did it. And now, to say, oh, that's a lie, he lied. It's a fascinating thing. I think it's a great challenge for parents of kids these days and all the students at those two tables. You've got a lot of work to do for your generation to help them know that how you check a source and make sure a story's fact.
Other question.
And just actually picking up on that point, Lisa, that you just said, a part of it as a former journalist, you're a journalist for life, really, when we talk about how informed we are, it's also about how we inform our society, our future generations, and how much of that should be on us so that they can recognize the difference between fact and fiction so that they are not led by social media.
That's a great point, because we are all in this together. Let's face it, we are society. It's not journalists, it's not teachers, it's parents. It starts at home. It starts at home. It has to. Those are the first influences of a child's mind. Now, I'm not a mother, but I have 8 nieces and nephews, and believe me, I grill them regularly and always have, and it's a part of a conversation that has to start very young, and then it carries through. But it cannot be on the shoulders of any bad behavior. It can't just be at the top level. It's everybody on every level has to watch this, expose it. If you see something, say something. It's that sort of thing, and that education really starts right away, I think.
You know, the other thing is, look at the problems that media outlets are having today in getting the paper out or the book printed or the program made. Maybe it's time we had a look at hardcore media and what they're doing, what problems they're running into, and how we can, I mean, it's possible that a lot of people don't even read the news in a day. And so they're so vulnerable to picking up rubbish that's easily available all over the place.
Yeah, it's a headline world. I mean, that's why I have to say this too. Okay, so everybody keeps saying, oh, the conventional television newscast is dead. Well, sorry, but we have massive ratings. We've never had better ratings. And I look at this and I say, why is this? Because all day long, people are inundated with headlines or tweets or bits of information. And I guess it speaks volumes for Canadians that they say, oh, I want to know the context. I want to know the actual story. So I think it means why more than ever news is important, critically important, but also that people do want, in this country, people do want to be informed. And I think that is a headline right there. We are different than our neighbors to the south.
Over here.
Oh, there we go.
So, can you hear me? I don't usually use these. I work in print. But
What?
why do you think that Trump seems to be so immune to the things that have felled so many others? They just seem to roll off of him.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, there's differences between Canada and the States, but you know, you'd think in some ways the States is much more conservative in their values. So if you could just sort of give me an opinion on that, I'd be interested in hearing it.
That is a very tough one. I mean, it is fascinating that, you know, a porn star can get $130,000 in hush money from the president, and he's still the president. I don't know how to answer that question.
You know, I believe that is why we are all feeling so off-kilter.
Yeah.
Time magazine ran a short essay last week by Steven Pinker, the psychologist, to talk about how to manage yourselves through these very unsettling times. A dishonest person won the biggest race in the world. A dishonest person continues to hold the chair with one lie after another, and it leaves you thinking, how can this be? Where do I fit in this? And what's going to come at me next? And which company is going to tell me another lie? So I think that's the bottom line in terms of how unsettled people are. There was a review also on how many people had PTSD simply from listening to the news. So
Oh, no.
I think it's a good point.
It's like
But
a
there has to
trigger
be
now.
pushback, and I think the pushback is beginning. This forum, for example, the Canadian Journalism Foundation coming up with a $10,000 prize. In our business, that's a pretty big deal. And I think people will creatively come together and decide, they always do at the darkest hour, decide how they can make change.
You know,
Because we need
satirists
it.
always nail this every night, the late night comedy shows. They nail it every night. And it is funny. It is funny when it's presented in front of you that way. And yet it's so not funny, this era of nothing matters, that you can do anything you want, you can say anything you want, and you know, depending on your position in this case, it doesn't seem to matter. But I agree with you that there will be a pushback, there is a pushback, and it does matter, and that if enough people say, yeah, actually, this does matter. And democracy always dictates, in the end, there will be midterm elections, we will have an election next year. I mean, it always comes down to the voter, thankfully, in the end, and we'll see how things unfold at that point. But it's a really tough question to answer. There are mechanisms in governments, and we'll see if they're enacted.
The bottom line, I think, is we are in a very troubled place. And it's all of us. It's not just the President of the United States or the anchor of CTV National News or any one of you. It's all of us, as Lisa said. We're in this together, and it's together we're going to get out of it.
This feels really depressing. We're actually a lot better at a dinner party, just kidding. But it does feel depressing, and yet it isn't. It should be encouraging to everybody here that we can make a difference. Every single person makes a difference when they say, no, I'm not buying that.
So my question concerns the influence of nations that want to destroy democracy, such as Russia, the role in the US election, apparently the attempted role in the French election, but the French pushed back and said we're not going to stoop to that level. What role do journalists play in making sure that Canadian politicians don't ever take the bait to endorse things that would promote outside interests for their benefit and at the expense of their opponent?
Well, I think we all learned a lot about the way the US election coverage unfolded. And in this country, I know that Facebook has already been in meetings with the federal government to try to come up with new rules around who you're going to allow to advertise, how you're going to reveal upfront who's paying for that, infomercial or whatever it is. And there are mechanisms that are being worked on before our next election to prevent against exactly this. I think that it's a shock that it seemed to just sweep the US election. And now we learn, pretty much 2 days after last November, how influenced they really were, and how there was some guy in a basement in Macedonia firing out all this stuff, getting paid for it, and making it seem real. And Facebook, Google, you name it, ran it. They ran it with no headlines saying, flashing lights, this is fake news, and people bought it. So we've all learned a lot, and I think we continue learning on that front to try to expose who's trying to corrupt our democracy from outside our own borders.
I want to add to that, though. It's not our job as journalists to convince politicians not to take that route. It's our job as journalists to follow them, to report on them, to dig out what is being hidden. I had to do an interview in Afghanistan recently, and actually with our very, very charming ambassador. And when I was arranging the interview, he said, "Is there anything else you need?" I said, "Yes, I want you to put me in touch with 2 people who can tell me what you won't tell me." And because that's our job, is to find out. Our job is not to tell politicians how to behave. And I'm sure you saw the movie The Post, and the dogged work people did in order to get at the truth and expose the danger that was going on.
That's what the old line, our job is to make people in comfortable positions uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Exposing the truth.
Over where?
Hi, Lisa. After all these years in the industry, what still inspires you?
Wow.
I didn't hear.
After all these years in this business, what still inspires us? And that's such a great question, because I am perpetually inspired. I really am. And I'm not an easy mark, but I am inspired by people every day, whether they're here in Toronto or last night it was Joanie Rochette, who,
Wasn't that terrific?
Like, there's so many times Rosa warns me, you better watch this story before it goes to air, because it's really emotional.
No
because
crying.
there are so many people who are doing inspiring things, and I am always inspired, and I am never going to let that go, because what's the alternative? Honestly, it would be a pretty black world if things that people do, little things that may never even get noticed, that is world changing. And I do believe it. I know I said it before, but it is one person at a time that makes a difference.
Just when you think you've seen it all, nothing could top this story. A little tiny story blows up and becomes even better than that one. Again, it was while I was in Afghanistan just a few weeks ago. Do you remember, it was 2009, do you remember that terrible story about the young girls going to school in Kandahar, and a bunch of boys came by on motorbikes and they threw battery acid in their faces for going to school? And it made world headlines. I remember Laura Bush had a lot to say about this, and President Karzai contacted the young girl who had the worst of the acid. Her name's Shamsia. And he said he would send her to India for treatment. But he said to her, "I will find the man who did this to you, and I will have him executed." So the kid goes off to India. She gets treatment, very, very good treatment. She comes back. she finishes school, and she gets picked up by this extraordinary group called Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan, and they turn her into a top-notch teacher because they've got modern methods and they've got a way of enhancing her own knowledge, and she becomes a teaching star. And what did she say? She said, President Karzai broke his promise to me. He didn't catch that guy. That guy's still wandering around my neighborhood. But she said, I gave that man a worse punishment than the president could ever give him. I'm teaching the girls. So you're forever inspired by a new story.
And on that note, we have a question from our student table.
Oh, good.
Hello.
Ladies and gentlemen, the future.
So in regards to the next generation, my question to you is, how do we voice opinions on what we believe is unethical or wrong in the media as we hear, besides the use of social media? Because I find that social media has been such a huge influence and a platform for students like us to voice our opinions, whether or not they're correct or wrong. How do we go about that?
What did you say?
How do we go about voicing our opinions? I mean, on social media and
Social media, what sort of platforms can we use?
CTV National News. Hello. Well, I mean, the point is there are now more ways than ever in history to voice an opinion. The question is, don't confuse an opinion. What's that great line? You're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And that is the key to this, is to call out the errors, the lies. There's some site called Snoop, I think. What's it called? Snopes. This is an amazing site that I'm just recently learning about, where you can, if you read something on social media, you call them out. And then, you know, everyone knows this story has no veracity, or where it came from, or something like that. But anyway, so, Snopes.
Is there one last question? No? Okay. I'd like to welcome Gordon McIver to thank our speakers today.
I could have listened to you guys all afternoon. It was absolutely wonderful. And by the way, there is such a great documentary here, the two of you speaking on this topic. So if you want us to give you the tape, we're glad to do so. We're very fortunate to have heard from two highly qualified, respected, and experienced Canadian journalists today on a topic that is now certainly part of our zeitgeist. An unfortunate reality that's not only made life more difficult for journalists, as we heard, but indeed, as both of our guests articulated today, for average citizens as well, since we can no longer assume that anything that we consume is based on empirical fact. The emergence of fake news has changed the way we view the world, which has become increasingly complex and difficult to navigate with any certainty. It changes the results of elections. It causes people to hate each other based on falsehoods, lies, and innuendo. It leads many of us into a kind of a permanent philosophical gray zone where there is little certainty left, or so it can seem at times. Now, we at the Empire Club have been tasked for well over a century now, 114 years to be exact, to bring these type of issues to Canadians. And of course, it would have been inconceivable to go through this year of 2018 without an examination of this hugely important societal development. When we decided to put this topic on our roster this year, it was clear that we had to hear from journalists who are leaders in their field and are looked to by others to set the standards and provide markers along the way, along the media consumption pathway, which has become somewhat perilous. For that reason, one of our biggest media stars, Lisa LaFlamme, was a pretty easy choice, and as our preferred speaker on this topic, a professional who spent decades in the field chasing the veracity of stories around the globe. And what better resource to pair her with than veteran journalist Sally Armstrong, who has during her career had the opportunity not only to pursue the biggest stories of the day, but what I find really fascinating in having followed your career, to go through a lot of personal examination on what it means to report on a story without becoming involved and having feelings, which is, after all, the very core of our humanity, about the stories being reported on. But one thing is for sure. In a world of lies, where we must clear away the debris of falsehoods and find the truth, the profession of journalism just significantly upped the ante. And for many men and women today, journalists have actually become the custodians of the golden fleece of truth. This new moral imperative puts more pressure on them than ever before, and it also gives rise to practitioners who run the gamut from the good to the bad to the ugly. So how fortunate are we today to have had in our midst two of the best, both having demonstrated not only excellent journalistic technique, but perhaps even more importantly, moral values that are solid and dependable. For that, we thank them and wish them the very best as they continue to seek the truth in a world where truth can be elusive, confusing, and even often painful. For that, Lisa LaFlamme and Sally Armstrong, a heartfelt thank you from all of us at the Empire Club of Canada.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, it was really nice. I have to give you a...
I want to express a sincere thank you to our sponsors today. We couldn't bring programs like this to our audience without their support, and we're extremely grateful. FCB Canada and Navigator Limited, thank you so much for making this event possible. I'd also like to thank MediaEvents.ca, Canada's online event space, for webcasting today's event for thousands of viewers around the world. And I also want to thank two of our sponsors, National Post, our print media sponsor, and our newest sponsor, Toronto Life, who has a table over across the way. Thank you so much. We're looking forward to our partnership with you. Although our club's been around since 1903, we have moved into the 21st century with social media. Follow us at empire_club on Twitter and online at www.empireclub.org. You can also follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and on Instagram. Finally, please join us again soon at our next event, February 15th, an evening event featuring a panel on NAFTA with MP Andrew Leslie and Ms. Scotty Greenwood in conversation with Robert Benzie of the Toronto Star. Thank you for your attendance today, and this meeting is now adjourned.